What do all of these games have in common? I bet you've never heard of them, but they're all indie, they're all made by solo devs or small teams, and they've all made enough to pay the developers enough money to keep the dream alive. If I asked you to give me a list of successful indie games, you might rattle off names like Stardew Valley, Vampire Survivors, and Schedule 1. But you probably wouldn't include the Ouroboros King, 3D Sen, Execute, or Master of Chess, even though they each earn their developers over $160,000 in gross revenue. You might be shocked to hear that there are more ways to become a successful indie dev than having a viral game. This idea that you have to be an overnight millionaire with everyone talking about your game, it's the quickest way to having a disappointing game dev career. The problem is that only games that make the headlines are the instant successes that made millions, or the total flops that made nothing, or players hated. It makes us all feel like these are the only two options when you launch a game. You're either set for life or back to the drawing board with your tail between your legs. But really, making millions and making zero are just opposite ends of a really big spectrum. So who makes up the middle of this spectrum? Well, there's a group of indie game developers who are quietly making a comfortable living. This isn't just an assumption based on anecdotal evidence. I got our data scientist and my husband, Ross, to crunch the numbers, and he found over 300 games that have made roughly $160,000 to $890,000 in gross revenue. When you take off Steam fees, taxes, expenses, and everything else it takes to release a game, that amounts to an average salary in the US. This group, the silent middle class of indie developers, are showing us that there are more ways to approach game development than this go big or go broke mentality that's being glamorized in the media. I've got 4 examples to share with you, and the hope is that you come away from this video feeling a bit optimistic that even if your game doesn't pop off, you're in with a chance of making more than $0. These 4 developers are all very different, but they're linked by a love of game development and a determination to make it work for them. I'll introduce you to Oriol Cosp Games, a data scientist turned game dev, Geodstudios, who spent over 10 years on one game, Payne Robinson, an English teacher who taught himself game dev from scratch, and finally Brane, who moonlighted as a game developer for over 10 years while working a regular 9-to-5 job. Transitioning from a high-paying tech job to indie game development sounds terrifying, but it doesn't take a lottery ticket type of success to be possible. Oriol Cosp is a great example of this because, as I said before, Ross is a data scientist and his dream of being a game developer is the whole reason we started our indie game studio in the first place. Back to Oriol Cosp. He made his first game, the Ouroboros King, while working a full-time data scientist job. He must have been exhausted. Using his 8 years of coding experience, his aim was to do with chess what Slay the Spire had done with card games and use similar gameplay patterns. Above everything, he knew it would be easy to code and would require little to no art skills. Working full-time as a data scientist and having a child under 5 meant that time wasn't exactly a commodity, but he committed to working on it part-time, 3 to 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. He released a prototype on itch in June 2022 before working on a demo to release on Steam, committing quite early on to release the full game in February 2023. Later, he used vacation time to make faster progress and counted on the extra time he would get from his daughter starting kindergarten. Long story short, he stuck to his word and released the Ouroboros King on the 27th of February 2023. The best thing is that his low expectations for sales were blown out of the water. In an early blog update, he expressed that he only expected to make just over $1,000 when it actually sold over 5,000 copies in its first month. A year after this launch, he wrote on his blog that he made around $87,000 profit after all the costs were deducted, including his time, which meant that for him, quitting his data scientist job and going full-time indie was a no-brainer. While his second game, Gods vs Horrors, didn't do as well as his first, he didn't give up. He wrote about the lessons he learned and moved on. He's now working on his 3rd and 4th release. The first thing that I've personally learned from researching Oriol is how he accounted for his time, and this is something that we all forget. We can work on our games for free for a while, but we can't work for free forever. Our time is worth money. The second thing is his logical approach to deciding what games to develop. He took the mechanics of popular games that he was interested in and combined them to form something new. It makes sense because those familiar mechanics would, in theory, mean that players of games like Slay the Spire and Hearthstone Battlegrounds would be able to pick up his games with ease. The third and final thing is his continuous learning from each release. On his blog, he does a detailed post-mortem of his first 2 games, using his background in data science to meticulously weigh up the impact that different marketing and development tactics had on his success. He's a perfect example of what we've talked about in a previous video of how to survive in indie game development. Keep making games that you enjoy developing and are proud to release, and keep learning from every release to make sure your experience keeps compounding. The next approach to game development couldn't be more different. Oriol Cosp focused on short projects, but Geodstudios spent 10 years creating a 3D NES emulator, and it paid off. What he thought would take a year as a hobby project actually took 10 to get to version 1.0. Launching the VR version into early access in 2019 with 46 supported games, and the PC version launched in 2020 with 70 supported games, all painstakingly built by Geode himself. The final build launched with over 100 games, all built by him too. This is really a story of compromisation, perseverance, and infectious dedication. When Geode first started the project in 2015, he was determined that each game would be converted automatically by an algorithm. In his mind, there was no room for manual work. Unfortunately, his algorithm had other plans, and only worked about 50% of the time. He finally developed a 4-step pipeline that combined automatic and manual processes, which meant that simpler games like Donkey Kong took him a few days to build, but more complicated games like The Legend of Zelda could take months. Letting go of having a fully automatic process was a necessary compromise. It meant that he didn't have to give up on the project altogether, and he could still complete his dream of experiencing his favourite childhood video games in 3D. He kept working through game after game for 10 years, intriguing game journalists with his early access launches and slowly building an audience that were keen to keep track of his progress. It turns out that he wasn't the only person who wanted to play NES games in 3D. 3D Zen PC alone has sold around 27,000 copies since it launched in 2025, and he now has a small but dedicated community of people using his 3D Zen Maker and uploading their own 3D versions of NES games. One community member has uploaded over a dozen completed games. In total, both versions of 3D Zen have grossed around $600,000, which over 10 years and after all the deductions, works out as a pretty good payout.
Fun coupons!
Now, this next developer has another great story, and you may have actually heard of him if you're an avid consumer of game dev content on YouTube. Payne Robinson is a full-time English teacher who taught himself how to develop games in Godot. His original project, which he's still working on now, is a game called Grid Tweaker, but it's got a very large scope, and his full-time job means that the learning curve is incredibly steep and progress is incredibly slow. Essentially, he burned himself out. Instead of ditching Grid Tweaker altogether, Payne decided to focus on a completely different game that he had floating around in his head. It was an opportunity to take a break from Grid Tweaker and develop his skills on a small scope game that I think took him around 6 to 9 months to complete. This is how Execute was born. He used the game to get excited about development again and to create systems and skills that would ultimately help him to complete Grid Tweaker, which is his dream game. Working on Execute meant that he could use the tiny amounts of time that he had at lunchtime and after work to make real progress on a game that he could ship sooner rather than in 10 years' time. And those tiny amounts of time earned him around $206,000 gross revenue, enough to pay off his student loan. Payne isn't stopping there with the small projects though. In one of his YouTube videos, he talks about how he wants to build up a portfolio of commercial games that help him to eventually get to the point where he can work full-time on his dream game.
You got a dream, you got to protect it.
While Oriol Cosp and Geode already had development experience, Payne Robinson is proof that you can come from a completely different, unrelated industry and still do well in game development. It's something I really relate to. When Ross floated the idea of developing games to me 2 years ago, I was a marketer in finance, not my dream job. and Ross was a data scientist in health tech, and we had nothing linking us to the game industry at all.
She doesn't even go here.
There is another thing that I love about Payne Robinson's stories so far. He had that determination to teach himself something completely new and the maturity to pause his dream game to release smaller games that contribute to the dream. Realising that game development is a long, long road full of compromises, rather than giving up after his big dream didn't go as planned, is something that we all need to learn from game developers like Payne Robinson. Plus, I love how he's using his skills as an English teacher to create really entertaining YouTube videos and bring us all along for the ride.
Are we there yet?
No.
So far in this video, we've seen that supplementing your life with a daily dose of game development can lead to surprising results, even if you expect nothing. I wanted to end with a developer who combines all the traits of Oriol Cosp, Geode, and Payne Robinson, but is approaching indie game dev in yet another different way. This developer is called Brane, and he's been dipping his toe into game development for over 10 years while becoming increasingly dissatisfied with his day job as a software developer. He's effectively moonlighting as a game developer, but it all paid off with his first commercial release, Master of Chess, in September 2025. Like Oriol and Payne, Brane is shipping multiple titles to continuously learn from each release and improve his game development skills. But while Oriol and Payne have focused on releasing commercial titles to build up their experience, Brane's early approach was to release free-to-play titles instead. Since 2017, he's been releasing small-scope titles on itch, including the iconically named I Have No Hands and I Must Hug. Even his first Steam release before Masters of Chess was free-to-play. Now, I will always be an advocate for developers who want to charge money for their games because I truly believe that every developer deserves to be paid for their work. But releasing free-to-play games does remove any of those expectations of monetary gain from the equation. It means that you can make games for the pure enjoyment of it and focus on learning rather than being distracted by any promise of any revenue at the end of it. I don't know if this is exactly why Brane released free games, but his job as a software developer meant that he already had a stable income and he didn't need to make money from games, so he could do what he liked. Like I said before, I can imagine that practicing with free games probably removed the mental pressure when he did finally start developing Master of Chess to be released as a paid game. The second thing is the dedication to a specific niche that we saw with Geode. In his blog, Brane admits that he didn't expect Master of Chess to do so well because it was so niche, but from all the research I've ever done into unique games, I think it did well because it was so niche. A unique obsession with making the chess version of Football Manager carried him through and helped him to attract some mega fans along the way, building a Discord server with over 1,000 members. He perfectly communicated his obsession and commitment to the game by posting about his progress every single day on his Discord, all while working full-time and becoming a father for the first time. After Master of Chess's success, making him around $290,000 gross revenue on Steam, Brane released another commercial game called Confidential Killings with his designer friend Lorenzo. This game did even better, earning the pair around $270,000 in gross revenue each. That's quite a tidy sum for a side hustle.
Yo, Adrian! I did it!
The message I'm trying to get across here is not to make a chess game, quit your day job, spend 10 years making one project, or to release free games. It's that being successful at game development doesn't look the way you think it does. All of these developers have or had a normal job while also making games. None of them went full-time to make their first game. They either haven't gone full-time yet or waited until it was financially viable. All of these developers have some kind of online presence, but none of them are YouTubers. Even Payne Robinson, with his 25,000 YouTube subscribers, works as a teacher for the majority of his income. All of these developers created a niche community around their games, either by accident or intentionally. None of these developers made even close to $1 million, but they did make an average US salary. All of these developers started out with a niche game that they were passionate about, and they all made sacrifices and compromises to get their first release out. They didn't push through and stick to something that wasn't working for them. They got out of their own way.
You see this guy here staring back at you?
Yeah?
That's your toughest opponent.
All of these developers just keep going. They're finding ways of enjoying and finding meaning in developing games so that they can keep developing them. That's the picture of successful indie game development that I got from researching these guys, plus a lot of good book recommendations.
What type of old people garbage is books?
If you enjoyed this video and found anything I said useful, then you might want to check out Game Oracle. It's the platform we built to make analysing niches on Steam and validating your game ideas accessible to any indie game developer, not just people who are into data and stats. You can explore Steam market trends, discover underserved niches, and find out where your game fits in the landscape of Steam without drowning in an entire dataset of Steam data. The link is in the description, it's free to try, and if you do try it out, let me know in the comments how you got on. We're always trying to improve it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.